It's not inflammatory to use the language of genocide when it comes to any of this stuff. It's not. It needs to be used. Like, do not feel shy about using apartheid state language. Do not feel shy about using genocide when you speak about this, because that is 100% what is happening here. And it's still happening. It was last week that it was revealed in BC that Indigenous children, little girls as young as 10 years old, are forcibly having IUDs inserted into them. That is eugenics. That is eugenics, and that is happening today. Not 50 years ago. Today. Really looking forward to hearing your view on the RS story. Yeah, I'll say this, everyone. I follow a lot of Indigenous accounts. There's a whole, there's different kinds of Twitters. I don't know if you knew this, but there's a black Twitter. It's called native Twitter. There's whole sections of Twitter that are a little bit kind of like insular communities. And if you follow a lot of accounts in any one section, you'll start to have your feed pop up with, I'll be honest, way better shit than if you just follow like a whole handful of news accounts. Like I used to use Twitter. Follow a lot more just smaller independent accounts. Really helps you out with the whole feed, stuff like that. Yeah, Irish Twitter is the thing. There's a whole bunch. Panda Supremacy, thank you very much. And following Indigenous Twitter, especially over the past week, has been very, very hard. Mostly because it's a mix of emotions. The biggest one being that, this is not news to Indigenous people. This is not a surprise to Indigenous people. What's more shocking, I guess, to them is how this is kind of awakening the world to this, which is a good thing, in my opinion, is definitely a good thing. But yeah, it's not news. It's not news. There's well, I'll go over it all. You know, I'll go over it all. We've known for years that they would bury kids around the schools. Yeah, we found one mass grave. I'll say that much. There's hundreds of residential schools across Canada. There's hundreds of mass graves. That's one mass grave of 235 kids. There's thousands of children buried underneath the ground of this country. Just thousands of kids buried underneath the ground. It's fucked. It's fucked. But we're gonna get through it. Canada's wholesome? Ooh, no. I made this button for a reason. It's a real country, and it's shitty. It's a genocidal apartheid nation state that is still doing genocide, and that hasn't stopped yet. Okay, I just want to give everyone a quick fresher to some of the income gaps and statistics between First Nations, Indigenous peoples of Canada, and the rest of us. So, if you didn't already know this, Indigenous peoples of Canada make up about 5% of the population, but they're incredibly overrepresented in everything else. Indigenous women, for example, make up 42% of all women in Canadian jails. Nearly half of all the women in Canadian jails happen to be Indigenous. Over half of all youth in youth prisons happen to be Indigenous. So again, 5% of the population overrepresented in nearly half of jail systems. Now, that's by design, unfortunately. There is incredibly high rates of alcohol addiction, incredibly high rates of drug addiction, incredibly high rates of suicide, all that stuff, which is basically what you would expect from a people's being genocided and colonialized since basically the birth of this nation. So it reflects itself, unfortunately, in the statistics.
Index. If First Nations were being measured using the same data, they would be 63rd, lower than Russia and Libya. First Nations are about 61% of Canada's Aboriginal population, which includes Inuit and Métis. That's just over 900,000 people.
Métis is my mom. That's my mom's band.
80% of First Nations live off reserve in cities and towns across Canada. The remaining 360,000 live on reserve. There are more than 2,300 reserves whose populations range from a couple hundred people to more than 10,000. First Nations communities face multiple crises. When it comes to education, First Nations people have a significantly higher dropout rate than other Canadians. 6 out of 10 First Nations living on reserve were high school dropouts. 3 out of 10 were dropouts for First Nations living off reserve. Compare that to 1 out of 10 for other Canadians. On reserve, more than half of First Nations need a new school, while over 70% of the schools need major repairs. Another startling statistic, a First Nation youth living on reserve is more likely to end up in jail than to graduate high school. Now let's take a look at income. Based on data from the 2006 census, 50% of Status First Nations children lived in poverty, compared to 17% for other Canadian kids. The median income for a First Nations person was a little over $19,000, compared to over $33,000 for other Canadians. Finally, health. The average life expectancy for First Nations men is 69 years, 9 years less than average for other Canadians. First Nations women live 77 years, or 5 years less than average. The infant mortality rate for First Nations is 1.5 times higher than for average Canadians. Compared to Canadian youth, the suicide rate is 5 to 6 times higher among First Nations youth. When it comes to diabetes, First Nations people aged 45 and over had nearly twice the rate compared with other Canadians. How can we narrow this deep divide between First Nations and Canadians? We've asked a variety of people to offer their best single idea. To read
So that was just some quick primers, but growing up in Canada, we learnt about our history, okay? We had a public education system. I was in the public education. There's no private schools going on here, okay? I was in the French immersion program. I had to learn school in French, and it was public, and I learnt all about my great Canadian history, okay? I learned to be proud of this country, and I want to teach you all about Canadian history very quickly now, and teach you about Superman.
And he can lift anything. Anything at all. He's that strong.
Joe Schuster, will you stop it or you'll miss your train? Now help me find number 5.
Strong, but by day he's a mild-mannered reporter. Glasses, you know, a secret identity.
Honestly, you Canadian kids.
He'd be in this cape.
A what?
A cape. Wearing these blue tights.
A hero in tights, really. Here it is.
Listen, Lois, this guy is faster than anything, I swear.
If you're not fast, you're gonna miss your train.
That's it. A bullet. A bullet. He's faster. No, he's faster than a speeding bullet.
Come on, get on it. No one's gonna read a comic strip about a strong man in tights, Joe. It'll never fly.
Fly, no. But he can leap over tall buildings. Oh, wow, yeah.
See what your cousin Frank says in Toronto.
Wait, Lois. I've got something for you. Take it. It's a gift. You never know. It might be worth something someday.
Whoa! Whoa! Yeah, Canada? We invented Superman. What? I didn't know. Okay, well, Canada's pretty based. I take everything back. Hey, we had a project called the Heritage Project, which if you're growing up in Canada, we got these ads on TV all the time to make us more proud of being Canadian. There's a whole bunch of them. You know, they really taught us about our history. Did you know we invented basketball? Yeah, you wouldn't know it, but a bunch of white Canadians invented basketball. Yeah, take that, America.
Is this some kind of Canadian joke, sir?
Cool.
I know you're the instructor and everything, but we can't carry the ball. How can we get a decent shot at the peach basket?
All right.
Oh, all right
We
there.
can't allow a carry of a couple of steps.
And Mr. Naismith, sir, it sure slows things down having to climb up here every time.
Well, then let's
yeah.
knock the bottom out of the basket.
Oh,
I need
well, there you go.
these back.
Oh.
100 years after James Naismith from Almont, Ontario invented it, basketball was being played by hundreds of millions of people.
Well, there you
around
go.
the world.
Oh, well, we're learning about Canada, eh? Yeah, okay, so he invented Superman and basketball. Oh, yeah, let's learn about Jacques Cartier and all that. Let's learn a little bit about Indigenous culture. There's one for that, too. Oh! Oh, the noble savages. Look at this. Oh, yeah, eh?
What's he saying, Father?
Commandant Cartier is saying this nation's name is Canada.
Canada.
Ah. Ah.
Canada.
Ah. That's where it comes from.
I think it really means
Canada.
No, believe me, I know the word. It means nation, and Canada is its name.
Oh. This is where it comes from.
But I'm sure it means the houses, the village.
Oh, so that's how this country was born. It was so peaceful. They were just friends, just little friendsies. What's this one?
You asked me a couple questions, and what were those questions?
Do you smoke crack cocaine?
Exactly. Yes, I have smoked crack cocaine.
When,
but
sir?
no, do I? Am I an addict? No.
When have you?
Have I tried it? Probably in one of my drunken stupors, probably approximately about a year ago. I answered your question. You asked the question properly, I'll answer it. Yes, I've made mistakes. All I can do now is apologize and move on. I don't know what. Guys, okay. Can I just?
Yes, please.
All I can say is I've made mistakes. And you guys kept referring to alcohol. There was a couple isolated incidents. There's been times when I've been in a drunken stupor. That's why I want to see the tape. I want everyone in the city to see this tape.
Toronto Mayor Rob Ford,
I'd like to see this tape. I don't even
the
recall
first Canadian mayor
tape in a video.
to admit
I know that,
to
so I wanna see
smoking
this
crack
tape that was
cocaine.
in. But,
a part of our heritage.
So anyways, I think you're getting the idea. The Canadian public school system, as well as our kind of propaganda that was given to us on television, was always giving us this really strange, rosy history of Canada. Okay, so I grew up in the public education system. All right, this is the kind of stuff that we were told on a regular thing. Canada, as it was basically explained to us, is a not just a melting pot. It was a mosaic, a melting mosaic, a beautiful melting mosaic of incredible things. Unfortunately, it kind of hides the complete genocidal truth of this country.
Relations that happened to me yesterday was me realizing my strength that I didn't know I had when I was a child. The strength for me to survive and walk away from that school and be here today. I always thought I was a weak man, but now I know how much strength I had to be able to come home and be where I'm at today. It was life-changing, and there was a lot of horrific things that happened to myself, and I know a lot of other individuals that were in that school system, probably my family and people from this community. But it's something that we never talked about, not until recently, and started doing our work to forgive and come back and live our lives. I know that my partner and my children now know what I experienced at the school, but it took a lot of courage for them to sit and listen, and for them to understand what we were talking about when we said residential school. Now they know.
Now, this might seem a little odd, especially if you haven't studied Canadian history beyond what they taught you in the public education system. Again, my public education had a very, very, very short, maybe we spent a day tops talking about residential schools in Canada, and an endless amount of days talking about Canadians' contribution to the world and why we all need to be proud of being Canadian. One of the big things that we were taught, of course, is Canada's contribution to World War II, how it was basically us and America, but mostly us who helped destroy and defeat the Nazis. It only would have been possible thanks to Canadian troops on D-Day that helped the Allies, as well as the military contributions from Canada. Stuff of that nature was basically the most important things that we talked about. Now, I'll say this, because I grew up in the public education system. I also grew up with an Indigenous mother. My mom's Métis. And when I was growing up and I was very young, she was bringing me to a lot of things that were, I guess, trying to make me proud of our Indigenous heritage. Things like we were going to smoke salmon ceremonies. I was in these, like, when I was really young, these award ceremonies that were for, like, Indigenous students. And I always thought they were kind of weird because they were getting awards for attendance, things like that. I didn't know at the time it's because attendance is so abysmal amongst Indigenous youth that, yeah, they were giving awards out for attendance. Like, someone someone who had attended school for like 5 years straight was getting a full-on like, you know, certificate and a trophy and stuff. And I as a little kid, I always thought it was kind of weird. But anyways, didn't think much of the experience. It wasn't until I got into high school, and in the high school program, we had this thing where if you were Indigenous in Canada, you would be allowed to leave certain classes and then enter this Indigenous course kind of training program, which at the time at first, I thought was the greatest thing in the world. I was like, fuck yeah, I don't have to like attend math for a full like, you know, quadrant or whatever you want to call it. And I can go and we're going to learn about making, you know, dream catchers and stuff like that. That sounds fucking awesome. So I went for the first couple times. There was only like 5 other students in my entire school. My school was like 99% white. I'll say that. So attended those for a couple classes. And then I found out that students at the school found out about that course and the fact that there were some Indigenous kids in it, and they were just saying the most atrocious racist things. They were going to find out who they were going to come and beat them up. So I started to lie about ever being part Indigenous and hid that part of my life, and also was ashamed of it, to the detriment, obviously, of the relationship between me and my mom. For years and years and years. I didn't even like think about it a second thought. It was one of those things where like there's nothing on the surface that looks even remotely like I'm as creamy as like a creamsicle, you know, like this is a snow cone of her, the Wesleyan. I am mayonnaise personified. So I'm as white passing as it comes. So I could very easily suddenly lie about that shit. Not only lie about it, but not even think twice about it. Obviously devastating to my mom, biggest shame I have in my life in terms of the things I've done to her. And yeah, didn't even acknowledge it until I was much older, years later, absolute years later, because of that. Because again, there was so much racism and so much racism towards Indigenous people, Indigenous kids even, in my grade, that it's just something that you would have to try and expunge, you know, pretend that like you're not even a part of this kind of society. It's absolutely fucked, and it also says a lot about the way kids are taught about Indigenous like Indigenous culture, Indigenous like the relationship between what Canada is supposed to be, which is this again perfect mosaic of cultures, and we love you know, the Indigenous heritage of Canada. After all, the name itself seems to be what they thought was the word for homes and houses, right? Canada. So it's all part of our experience, and we have Justin Trudeau now. He's a proud you know, a blackface prime minister who dresses up in Indigenous garb when he needs to, and he's all about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all this kind of shit. But they don't tell you the actual dark history of this. So I'm going to do a quick primer for you to... I'll say this, actually. Here's a really good way of putting this. Canada, as a country... Let's see if I can find a picture of it, because it's pretty wild. For the formation of this nation, it's kind of wild, but this giant area here... Because Canada's massive. This giant area here is known as the Hudson Bay. The Hudson Bay company or corporation became one of the early cornerstones of Canada, to the point where a company actually owned this much of the country in its early inception. We're talking like, this is early colonial days, right? So while America was basically a combination of different, you know, British colonies and states popping up before the War of Independence, Canada was in large part owned by a corporation known as the Hudson Bay Company. The Hudson Bay Company existed to get the very super valuable pelts, namely beaver pelts, extract them and then send them back to Europe. Now, in order to do this, they would require a huge amount of assistance from Indigenous peoples, the peoples that they were colonizing, genociding, raping, pillaging, all that kind of stuff. They also needed their help, because to get through a lot of this area, it's really, really tough to do without canoes and without a lot of knowledge of the inherent dangers that are present, a lot of wildlife, a lot of bears, stuff like that. So there was a necessary union, let's just say that, more of an exploitation, but part of this was that a huge amount of people who were based in Saskatchewan were forcibly, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, raping Indigenous women to form like new communities and new societies. A lot of those people became what are known as Métis. Métis are a combination of usually French colonizers, Scottish colonizers, Irish colonizers, even some like, you know, Ukrainian colonizers. It's a weird mix, but mostly Scottish and French colonizers who had Cree wives. In the case of like my family's heritage, that side of the family is Cree, and they became their own people eventually. known as the Métis people, who had their own distinct language. It's known as Mischief. They had their own culture, music. It's strangely influenced a lot by like Irish Celtic stuff with like violins and beating and stuff like that. And then they eventually, under the leadership of the leader of the Métis people, Louis Riel, started to want to rebel against Canada and form their own country. So they actually started battling against Canada. All this being said, the first Prime Minister of Canada, the Honourable Right Sir John A. Macdonald, was the first one to implement and start what is known as the Indian Act. The Indian Act is going to sound, I know we don't use the term Indian anymore, because it's basically white people were trying to find a passage to India for the spice and trade route, and thought they had discovered it in North America, and then just decided to stick with the name. So that's why the term Indian is what it is. But anyways, the Indian Act of Canada would be the first declaration by Sir John A. Macdonald of trying to solve the Indian problem. That was the way they put it. And that included basically the framework, which still exists today, for the mass cultural and ethnic cleansing of Indigenous peoples in this country. Sir John A. Macdonald, the founder of this country, is a genocidal madman, someone who was a white supremacist in the purest sense of the word, not in that he just was someone who was trying to uphold the structures of power for white people, but that he was an actual white supremacist, and that he believed that white people were inherently superior to other races and wanted to further the Aryan race, as he put it, like this, his own words, not mine, for the glory of the empire and the queen. So Sir John A. Macdonald was well known for intentionally starving Indigenous people, Indigenous communities, and I mean that. He would instead of sometimes just butchering them through military action, would intentionally starve them out so that women, children, kids would die slowly. That was one of his things. He was also a complete drunk. It's one of the reasons why these days, like the statues of Sir John A. Macdonald that are permeated throughout Canada are considered to be pretty controversial, and ones that like a lot of people, myself included, would like torn down. I think it can be talked about in museums, whatever that is, but you know, there's a reason why John A. Macdonald statues today in this country are usually covered in red paint and blood and stuff like that.
For more than 200 years, religious orders run mission schools for Indigenous children, the precursors to the Government of Canada's residential school system. The Mohawk Institute becomes a boarding school. Run by the Anglican Church, it is the first government-funded residential school in Canada. A government report recommends Indigenous children be separated from their parents in order to assimilate them into Western culture. These recommendations influence federal laws and policies designed to strip Indigenous people of their culture and rights. Isle Cross opens in northern Saskatchewan. The majority of students are Métis. The government takes authority over Indigenous people and education for First Nations. The Indian Act gives the Canadian government control over Indigenous rights and culture. The Act includes only First Nations as status Indians. It excludes Métis and Inuit. Prime Minister John A. Macdonald authorizes the creation of the residential school system, which is designed to isolate Indigenous children from their families and cut all ties to their cultures. The number of schools across Canada quickly climbs to over 40. The Government of Canada requires First Nations children aged 7 to 16 to attend residential school. Dr. Peter Henderson Bryce exposes the government's neglect of Indigenous children's health, including alarmingly high death rates of residential school students. More than 80 institutions are in operation across Canada, the most at any one time. 4 students are investigated for arson. Others reportedly cheer as they watch the school burn. This is one of dozens of fires set by students across Canada as a form of resistance. Inuit children are officially included in the residential school system. 6 schools open in the Western Arctic.
Now, I just want to... Oh, thank you, Modestes. I appreciate that. I just want to explain very quickly what exactly is happening here. The idea was that there was an unbelievably large amount of Indigenous children present in the Canadian system, and what they thought was that we could get rid of the It was called the Indian Within. That was the actual purpose of the residential school system, to eliminate culturally and ideally ethnically down the road Indigenous kids. Now, this was done, obviously, in partnership with the Catholic schools at first, and then the Government of Canada became the official overseer of this entire program. The program literally took children from their parents' arms, from their mother's arms, and ripped them out and then threw them forcibly into these schools for years. You wouldn't be able to see your parents. Once you were in these schools, they would erase everything that they considered Indigenous about you. They would change your names. If you had an Indigenous name, you suddenly got a white Catholic Christian name, proper name. I'm sure everyone is familiar with that practice from, the slave trade in America. They would eliminate your language. You would have to learn French or English, depending on where your residential school system was located. You would then have all of your culture basically removed from you forcibly. Some of them even had numbers. They would sometimes refer to them as just a series of digits to dehumanize the kids further. They were systematically tortured. I mean that both physically and sexually across the board. There was thousands and thousands of cases of sexual and physical abuse to the kids. They were tortured traditionally in that they were actually electrocuted. The most pernicious residential school in Canada had an electric chair where they were electrocuting kids. On top of that, this discovery, which just is now shocking the world, of there being a mass grave underneath one of the residential schools of 235 kids, that's one of undoubtedly hundreds and hundreds of mass graves that are across this country, filled with the bones of children, many of them as young as 3 years old. Now, I know that image is the one that's suddenly very visceral to everyone, and it's the one that's making everyone kind of wake up and realize how horrifying this is, but none of this is new. None of this is in any way a new revelation. Why this is so devastating is because so many of the families of those kids had been told that their children ran away. That was the most common thing told to the parents who had their kids taken from them, that their kids just ran away and we don't know where they've gone. Where the truth was, they were either murdered or died. Now, I've seen a lot of fucked up shit pop up on the internet since starting to tweet about this pretty heavily. And the biggest excuse or thing that I've been seeing pop up on a regular basis is people saying, well, the child death rates were very high in that period. And so it's very typical that kids would have died from disease. Kids would have died from a whole host of things. It's very natural for child mortality to be high. Anything that happened to kids under this program is the responsibility of the federal government of Canada. Anything. If you are taking kids from their mother's arms, and you are then saying that we are going to be responsible for them, to erase the Indian within, to erase the Indigenous qualities of them, to be able to turn them into white kids, because that's in essence what this program was. It was to turn them into white children. That would be the ideal solution to this program if they graduated from it and then entered modern Canadian society. Every single death is on your hands. Every single one. There's not an exception to that rule. It doesn't matter if they died from natural causes. Didn't matter if they died from torture. Didn't matter if they died from literally being beaten to death, because many of them were killed from being beaten to death. Every single one of those deaths across the board is on the hands of the federal government of Canada.
As the government takes over the administration of many church-run residential schools. Grolier Hall and Stringer Hall open in Inuvik, housing 500 students. More than 20,000 Indigenous children are taken from their families by government social workers and placed in foster care or adoption homes, often with non-Indigenous families. Adoptees lose connection with their Indigenous language, culture, and identity. 12-year-old Chani Wenjak dies after escaping from the Cecilia Jeffrey Residential School. A formal investigation follows. The all-white jury finds that residential schools cause tremendous emotional and psychological problems. The Canadian government takes over responsibility for the remaining schools from the churches.
Now, I'll be honest, one of the things that is a little bit inspiring by this is the fact that the more information that came out about this, the more people were shocked to their core and the more pushback came. But this whole thing isn't like a dark part of our history. It happened many years ago. You're going to find out very shortly that the last one of these schools closed in 1996. 1996. Okay? I was buying a Nintendo 64 with savings. And when I was doing that, there was still a residential school operating, torturing, murdering, and raping Indigenous kids. just on another side of Canada.
Thousands of Indigenous students are enrolled at the 28 residential schools that are still running in Canada. Phil Fontaine, head of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, speaks publicly of the abuse he suffered at Fort Alexander Indian Residential School. He calls for a public inquiry, which the federal government initiates in 1991. Gordon's residential school is the last federally run school to close. The report recommends a public inquiry into the effects of residential schools, including language loss and trauma. The government provides compensation to survivors, including the Common Experience Payment, and a focus on funding and supporting Indigenous health and healing.
Now, this is something else. Like I said, I was getting a lot of strange pushback from people. Something else that was getting tweeted at me constantly was like, this is over. All right, we've had a public inquiry into it already. Part of that inquiry included a settlement, and that settlement and a combined apology from the Prime Minister of Canada, from Mr. Stephen Harper, a conservative of all people. It should be enough. Is this not over? Right now, I'm gonna let this timeline finish, but I want to bring this up because this is something that is being tweeted at me constantly. Is that, hey, by the way, there's a final report on residential schools. Come on, this came out a little while ago. This was in 2015. A teary-eyed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is vowing his government will go beyond the 94 calls to action cited in the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission into Canada's residential school system. The commission formally wrapped up its 6-year plus Odyssey Tuesday with another emotional ceremony in Ottawa, this time to deliver a complete 7-volume, 3,766-page report that supports the 3-member commission's recommendation. We need nothing less than a total renewal of the relationship between Canada and its Indigenous people. I will give you my word that we will renew and respect the relationship. Trudeau, whose Liberals came to office in October, was pointedly reminded before speaking that he was about to become the first Prime Minister to formally address the Commission, which was born out of a 2007 class action judgment won by residential school survivors. Now, here's the first important part. This was not because, out of the goodness of Canadians' hearts, all of a sudden the federal government of Canada was like, you know what? We are ready for our mea culpa. We're going to be doing some reparations here, and we're going to help you out. No, this was from a 2007 class action lawsuit that was won. Yes, a lot of the greatest victories that have happened for Indigenous people in Canada have happened because it's gone to the Supreme Court of Canada. And yes, usually they've won. I should remind everybody, by the way, when you hear things like land back, settler colonialism, what do these words mean? Do they have any meaning? Is everyone a settler? Wait, am I a settler? I was born here. I don't deserve to be called a settler. None of this. This is wild. There was a lot of treaties that were agreed to between colonizers and Indigenous peoples of this country, especially because in the early days of Canadian history, there was a combination of the two of them, okay? There was basically, like I said, we had the Hudson Bay Company and people coming to this country, and they needed to partner and associate with Indigenous peoples because they knew a lot of the best trade routes, a lot of the best capture routes, a lot of the best ways to be able to capture and acquire pelts. Beaver pelts especially were incredibly valuable over in Europe. So it was a little bit like the Canadian gold was the early Canadian fur trade and some of the early things. So in order to formulate and get agreements with Indigenous peoples, they signed a whole bunch of treaties. Treaties which said you have autonomous control over your land. You are your own individual country. You will forever be considered to have your own nation state, and we are not allowed to infringe upon that. Time after time again throughout history, they have not obeyed those treaties. They have shit all over them. They have taken the people. They have done both real cultural ethnic cleansing as well as cultural genocide. They've systematically forced Indigenous peoples into these small little places called reserves. I'm sure you've heard of those reserves. The fucked up thing about reserves, both the reservation system in America and the one in Canada, is that you've taken, like, you know how enormous Canada and America are. They're fucking gigantic plots of land. Within those plots of land, there is a fuck ton of different Indigenous communities. I'm talking vastly different in every way, shape, and form. Culturally, spiritually, the way they dress, the way they speak, the way their history is. Completely different ethnicities, okay? But we've lumped them all together as this monolith, and this giant monolith is the Indian. So they're all just Indians, every single one of them. Whereas if you were to point out the differences between the Haida Gwaii people and Cree, they are completely different in every way, shape, and form. Like the two of them, they would not make sense paired up together as the same kind of people. And then what we did is we squished them. We squished all these different cultures and languages and ethnicities, people who may have been warring at one point. We squished them all and put them into these small little boroughs, these ghettos. Like absolute ghettos is what the reservation system of both Canada and the United States was. Forcing all these people to suddenly have to live together in these teeny little plots of land. And when they're inside these teeny little plots of land, we then impoverish them. Generation after generation after generation. Add to that, of course, all the horrifying PTSD and atrocities of ripping all their kids out of their families so they've got no children. We literally take their kids away, and at the same time, we continue to beat and impoverish them. And so, yes, super high rates of alcoholism, super high rates of suicide, super high rates of crime. What a surprise. Like, is any of that surprising in the slightest, that would be the result of all this stuff happening? Like, of course it's fucking going to happen that way. It's like, this is just natural. This is the way human beings experience and result and reflect upon trauma over and over again. But anyways, it's better now, right? So they won this court case. Trudeau came out. He dresses up in like ceremonial garb. All fantastic. Mea culpa. Problem solved. Except this. Despite the promise of reconciliation, Trudeau spent nearly $100 million fighting First Nations in court during the first years in power and fighting residential school survivors. Fighting them in court so that they would not be able to get their just due, their mea culpa, spending $100 million. $100 million battling them. Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada spent nearly $58 million on legal services this fiscal year, 2 times more than the RCMP or Defense Department, respectively, and more than any other federal department other than the Canadian Revenue Agency, according to public records. It counted 366 active court cases, 764 open but essentially dormant ones this year, amounting to $6.6 billion in contingent legal liabilities. The overall potential legal liabilities rose to $22.4 billion in land claims and other special claims factored in. So they're fighting Indigenous people tooth and nail while posturing in the public arena that, hey, we're doing everything we can to offer reconciliation. Okay, we've done commissions, we've done the Truth and Reconciliation Report, we have a whole bunch of calls to action, and we're doing the full mea culpa. Okay, they're getting a little bit of money. Some of these families are, anyways. And in the background, we're going to be battling every aspect of this legally to make sure there's no ground ceded when it comes to the rights of Indigenous peoples. So when people say land back, when people say settler colonialism, it's because they're not dead. It's because Indigenous people are still alive and they're still trying, despite the best efforts of the Canadian government, to survive. And that's why it's in essence imperative that you end the apartheid state, that you end this double status where you are just treating these people less than humane. You are treating them, you are actively genociding them. And that's the same thing is in relation to other countries. When we say you have to end and abolish the apartheid state of the settlements of Israel upon the Palestinians, it's because the Palestinians are actively being ethnically cleansed. And so until that stops, until we have okay, this is going to stop, we are now going to say that you once again have control over your own ancestral lands that we promised you. That's the other fucked up thing here, that we promised you, that colonizers, the people who came to this country and have been forcibly, actively genociding Indigenous people, we signed treaties with you already. So we're just asking you to honor those treaties. That's it. Honor those treaties. And guess what? There's a net fucking benefit to doing that, okay? Beyond the fact that it's the humane, right, and legal thing to do, because it is the legal thing to do. All the victories for land back recently in Canada have been because when this gets to the Supreme Court of Canada, yeah, there's not really a tenable way to defend this and also hold up an old treaty that says, but you said you signed this, and then it's like, yeah, that's true. All right, fine. You win. Indigenous people, according to National Geographic, globally make up about 5% of the world's population. We're talking the original Indigenous peoples to their lands. They protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. 80%. This is not some far leftist, pinko communist publication. This is from National Geographic. 80% of the world's biodiversity is being defended by Indigenous peoples. It doesn't matter where. If it's in Australia, if it's in New Zealand, if it's in fucking Brazil. If it's Brazil, it's Indigenous people fighting the rainforests, fighting to keep them fucking still alive. It's Indigenous people in North America, here right now, live in Kamloops, fighting to have old growth trees not get cut down. 80%. 80% of the world's biodiversity is being protected by Indigenous peoples. So if you give them land back, the land that is their land, if you allow them to have autonomy over their own areas, guess what they'll do with it? They'll protect the water. They'll protect the oceans. They'll protect the forests. They'll protect it all. They'll keep it alive. And that stuff is so crucially important. So there is a net benefit to doing this, to doing the right thing, to say the very least. Indian residential schools already have 5,300 alleged abusers still alive, located in Ottawa. 17 private investigation firms contracted by the government at a cost of $1.5 million to help settle abuse claims. 5,300 alleged abusers. Because this was such a massive program on such a systematic scale in this country, because there was, again, thousands of teachers, there is thousands of living abusers who will never be held to task for their crimes. We're talking the mass systemic abuse of children, sexually, physically, but they'll never face persecution for their crimes. Thousands of them are just free to live about their days and to just get away with this. See, this is the kind of thing where it's like, there has been no reconciliation, because that's a part of the process, right? Without reconciliation, there cannot be mea culpas. There cannot be, you cannot ask Indigenous people to suddenly just live and let live or forget, because every day they're reminded of this. Beyond the PTSD that most of them experience today, thousands and thousands of them who are still alive, survivors they're called because they survived this experience that ended again in 1996. They're reminded of this when something like that news comes out, that all of a sudden they have found the mass graves of 235 dead kids. Like, all of a sudden it just puts it all back into the fucking forefront. And it's like, yeah, we lied to you. We lied to you that your kids ran away. We did. Not only did they not run away, we killed them. We killed them all. And there's just piles and piles of dead bodies. There was, I think something like 16 dead kids, and they were mostly white, middle-income kids, were found in Canada a couple years ago. It shocked this country to its core, froze everything. National Day of Mourning. All of a sudden, this was a huge deal. And this time, 235 dead Indigenous kids, and it's every day they're kind of today Trudeau fucking put out the statement. What was it? To honor the 215 children whose lives were taken at the former Kamloops Residential School and all Indigenous children who never made it home, the survivors and their families, I have asked that the Peace Tower flag and flags on all federal buildings be flown at half-mast. Cool story, bro. Cool story. You might want to stop suing the families who are trying to get some form of reconciliation going here. You might want to stop that. You might want to put a pause on that, While you're wearing your Indigenous blankets and acting as if you are the new woke prime minister saving us, flying flags at half-mast doesn't really do shit all, And that's why, it's not inflammatory to use the language of genocide when it comes to any of this stuff. It's not. It needs to be used. Do not feel shy about using apartheid state language. Do not feel shy about using genocide when you speak about this, because that is 100% what is happening here. And it's still happening. It was last week that it was revealed in BC that Indigenous children, little girls as young as 10 years old, are forcibly having IUDs inserted into them. That is eugenics. That is eugenics, and that is happening today. Not 50 years ago. Today. 2 years ago, it was revealed that a whole bunch of women in Saskatchewan are doing a class action lawsuit because they have been forced to have either hysterectomies or being forcibly sterilized against their will as a precursor to get public health care in Canada, something that is supposed to be given to every single Canadian. Every single Canadian is supposed to be able to receive public health care. But there is a different set of standards for Indigenous people. There is racism that is so prevalent and so encoded within the Canadian experience that Indigenous women are told that they won't receive health care unless they no longer can have kids, because the racist doctors and the racist healthcare system doesn't want the undue burden of having more Indigenous children. That is eugenics. That is eugenics, and that is happening today. So this is still actively happening. So that's why it has to be called out. That's why it has to be called out, and it needs to be abolished immediately. But it has to be abolished before any single thing can take place, before any kind of reconciliation, before any kind of the very idea of forgiveness, the very idea of we want to put this behind us, we want to stop thinking about this. Well, then yes, then we need to stop actively genociding Indigenous kids and genociding Indigenous families. It's still happening. 5% of the population.
An effort. I gather you don't feel what he's doing is worthwhile.
Well, have you seen how much teenagers are going missing in Thunder Bay? There's white supremacy, obviously. That's what's going on. That young boy. Yeah.
How can he be blamed for that? I mean, you don't think that anything he's doing is helping the situation? Is he an improvement over Stephen Harper? I mean, what talk about his record? Is it?
Excuse me, did I just hear you correctly? How can he be blamed with that?
No.
Excuse me.
Excuse me.
Don't speak to us that way.
Stop right now. You do not speak to us that way. We are human beings. And the way that you're speaking to us
is not acceptable. No, stop it. Stop it right now.
We don't want you here. Can you please leave?
Step out. Step out. Then I don't want to hear from you.
You have no right.
You don't speak to us like that.
Very simple question. Can I have an answer?
And this is the problem, the way you communicate.
I'm not insinuating anything. I'm looking for information.
I'm not going to argue with you.
I'm not arguing.
No, stop. Stop. You need to stop. You need to stop. Stop. You're a guest here. And you don't even know how to speak to us. You don't even recognize the tone in your voice and your delivery. And no, you're done. You're done. Next question.
I'll re-ask Julie's question. How do you think?
You want to re-ask?
Yes. How do you think?
You better be respectful.
I'm being totally respectful. I'm asking how Justin Trudeau's record compared to Stephen Harper's record. Do you think he's improved the situation? I think that's what Julie was asking.
We have a holistic genocide happening here.
Don't speak on behalf of Julie.
Could you just answer the question,
I
please?
can speak for myself. I was asking.
And I can speak for myself. You know what, white people? You've had your voice here for 524 years. 524 years you've been visible, white lady. You've been visible for 524 years. Look how fast your white man comes and steps up for you. Where is everybody else to come and step up for us? I have a right to my voice. I'm still fighting for my voice and my visibility.
We asked the question.
And I'm telling you right now, there has been 524 years of holistic genocide on Turtle Island. We're the ones that are dying. It's not you that is dying. And as far as how Justin Trudeau is doing, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is we're asking the United Nations to help us that charges of genocide, a war against humanity, war crimes, and a crime of aggression be laid, because your Liberal Party was also responsible. Every party, every governance that has been in power, there's been a war conflict of Indian Residential School, 60 Scoop, Indian Day School, and Millennium Scoop. None of your governments have clean hands. All of your governments have blood on their hands. None of you are different. You haven't changed because you haven't started your healing journeys. The moment that we have our voice in our backbone, you want to shut us down. And you think you're privileged to disrespect us. The moment we tell you, because of your colonial mindset and your colonial way of being, your white privilege, your white fragility, you can't take our truth. Look how many people came to bat for you, white lady, and you're a guest here. Without us, you'd be homeless. This is over.
It's got to be one of the best press conferences that's ever happened. Yeah, I'll share that.
It's Canada's secret shame.
It's true. Oh, nice.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No. I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. The progress is healing the wound that the blow made. They won't even admit the knife is there.
You feel, however, that we're making progress in this country and worldwide?
No.
True. All right. Give me 1 sec. I want to play one last Indigenous song, and then we'll move on. This is Okitan by Jeremy Dutcher. It means canoe.
I want
And if you're not familiar with Jeremy Dutcher, holy fuck, just like, if ever there was a voice of an angel, this has got to be like one of the greatest Indigenous singers who's working today. Oh, nice Johnny Chaplin. Yeah, I'll pull that up, Most Valuable Proletariat. Give me 1 sec. It's so beautiful. So good. Yeah, so that's Jeremy Dutcher. If you don't know, Indigenous artist in Canada. Fucking unreal. Here's the link if you all want to listen to it on your own time. I would recommend listening to his entire album. It's really good. And finally, to answer the final question, people are asking, what are some good books on Indigenous issues in Canada and worldwide? I have 3 recommendations I will now share. Hold on, let me turn this off. Okay. The first one is pretty much the Bible when it comes to Indigenous issues. I highly recommend reading The Inconvenient Indian. It's soon to be a documentary coming out by Thomas King. Probably one of the best books I could recommend on the Indigenous history and culture and experience and their genocide occurring in North America. That one I would highly recommend. In terms of the treatment of Indigenous people on reserves and their lived experience. Tanya Talaga, 7 Fallen Feathers, Racism, Death, and Hard Truths in Northern City. Fantastic, beautiful book. Very hard read. I don't recommend reading it if you have a lot of trouble dealing with genocide, racism, sexual abuse, trauma, stuff like that. And this is a recent one that someone recommended to me, Dark Emu. This one's talking about the Australian Indigenous experience, something that I had absolutely zero knowledge of prior to reading this book. Also, heavily recommend Dark Emu. Really, really good book.
Hey, do you like movies? Do you like Serfs? Do you want movies and Serfs watching the movies? So then come over to the new channels. It's the Serfs the cinema. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Can you do the thing, that thumbs up and comment and all those things that help us out in the algorithm that controls every aspect of our lives? Also, if you happen to have a Facebook account, can you delete it? Like just delete it. You should probably delete your Facebook account because it's not a great company. But hey, if you can't do that for whatever reason, I understand. And could you also go to facebook.com/thesurftimes then and give us a little like and a follow. We're just trying to push back against the fact that people like Ben Shapiro happen to dominate the platform entirely. And when everyone asks, why do older generations believe the things they believe? One of the problems is the majority of them on social media use Facebook. So to counter that, we're just going to be on there too now. Also, if you happen to have a union or a worker co-op or even a leftist project, podcast, website, Zoom, MySpace, it doesn't matter. We will advertise it for free on this channel. All you got to do is go to weareserfs.com and use the forms that we got there, weareserfs.com. Thanks, everybody.
To our God, Xander Corvus, we shall build ornate temples in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, and the Tim Caucus, we aim to be the best court jesters your money can buy. To our lords, Evan Nudie, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Ryan Lubin, Tofox, Jeff Lamb, Sint Forzi, we are your humble vassals, ready to till your land. To our Knights of the Round Table, Omni, Mr. Anderson, Riley and Anna, Ryan Craig, Multimondi, Trevor Janis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophoja, Saren 42, Chronic to Hempob, The Great Houdini, Bowen Jenny, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Jay Fraser Cartwright, Jimmy Bignuts, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Yopi, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Constance Joyce Lacheris. We raise our glass of mead and we salute you.